Welcome to the Talk and Chatter experience powered by Gasoline Alley Harley Davidson, Pirelli Motorcycle Tyres Australia, and TCX Boots. Chris Forsberg, welcome to Queensland Raceway, mate.
Yes,
welcome
sir.
to
Thank you.
Yeah, welcome to QR Drift Matsuri for autumn. Mate, you took the flight over on Monday.
We got in Monday morning and got to kind of cruise around Gold Coast. Went over to Mount Tamborine and went down to Byron Bay, just getting a nice overall view of the area. So it was really cool before we just settled in out here, Queensland Raceway.
Tell me, how's it been, mate? Has it been a good experience so far? You've obviously been to Australia, but have you been much time in Queensland before?
No, this is the first time being out inland like this. I've been to Melbourne, I've been to Sydney, I've been to Adelaide actually for an event a long time ago. So yeah, this is my first time to Queensland Raceway. Beautiful facility. I heard it's been recently renovated and they've done a fantastic job. The garages are awesome. This facility right here, and the track is enormous. I can see so many different configurations.
Yeah.
You got the dirt tracks out here, the speedways, like so many different, additions to it all.
Yeah, it's definitely changed. Like this place, about 2020, 21, it changed hands to the current people that it's in, and we're currently in the corporate centre, and it's changed so much over the short time. I'm glad you're here now because it's a good time to be here. What are you driving this weekend?
I have heard rumors of an R31. So
Yeah, cool.
I haven't seen it yet, but I was told it was an R31. It'll be my first time drifting in one.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, it'd be very cool.
How does this conversation come about? Like you live in America. You've done drift for 21 years.
I've been drifting since 1999, and I've been drifting professionally or in competition with Formula Drift since 2004.
How does conversation about coming to Australia, and was that a wild dream at one point, or how's this all work?
I mean, the first time, yes, of course. Like I got the invite to many different countries, and that's been one of the coolest things that drifting has brought to me is the ability to travel the world. I've helped facilitate bringing drifting to many countries such as China, El Salvador, Panama, Costa Rica, Chile, and it's been really, really cool to go to all these different places. And like obviously I've been to Europe and Japan and Australia now, to be able to kind of bring drifting for the first time to some of those other countries is really fun experience. And to get out here in Australia, it was interesting because my friend Jason Farron, Keep It Reed, he had his Drift Fest just 2 months ago. And so he invited me out to that one, and that was a fun event. We got to go do that down in Melbourne. And then while I was there, it was Michael Jin who came up to me and asked if I would like to come back to Australia to come to Drift Matsuri. And so here we are.
Is that how it started?
Yeah, that was it. It was basically hanging out in the pub after the after the day at the track, and he's like, "We have a big event coming up soon. Like, you should come back."
That's unreal.
Yeah.
So you've done 2 long hauls in 3 months?
Oh yeah. It's life on an airplane, for us. So it's
Absolutely.
a lot of traveling, a lot of going, and like right around now, from end of March, April, all the way till November is basically 1 weekend off a month on average, and we're basically flying to another city, another state, every other.
Tell me about this. 1999, you start out, you have an RX-7.
I did, yeah.
You start obviously drifting or racing, and then drift becomes a thing.
Yep.
How much has it changed in that period of time? Tell us about some of the steps of the cars. Obviously, Nissan's a huge part of your journey. Tell us a bit about that as well.
Yeah, so drifting has changed so much. I would say like every 5 years there's a big shift in drifting. And so to compare it from 99 to now is like light years away.
Yep.
But when I first got into it, it was me and a couple of my friends. We were building cars in our garage. We were our friends mostly had like Hondas and Diamond Stars, so like Mitsubishis and things like that. And we had a couple of us with rear-wheel drive cars.
Yeah.
And we're like, well, these are more fun to drive, right? They get a little squirrely. And we didn't even know what drifting was. We just knew that they would spin tires because we're starting to make some horsepower with them. We don't know anything about setting up for traction. We have no suspension on these cars. So they're just like getting squirrely down the road.
Yep.
And so it turned into the way that we discovered drifting was trying to find parts for these cars. So an 88 Mazda RX-7 back in 1999, you're not going to find anything in the States, right? There's like barely any companies that are carrying parts for that type of vehicle. It was not popular. And so as we're searching online, we start to find pictures of these slam, Haraguchi's car, of course. So like these slammed big wheels, big body kits, and they're snapped sideways. And we're like, what the heck is that?
We
And
need
so
this. Yep.
that's basically how we discovered drifting, was trying to find parts for our cars that we wanted to make horsepower with. And we discovered these like, slammed big, real stylish cars in Japan. And we started to dissect their, as we get videos, it was Real Player. There is no YouTube back then. So we started downloading videos and we see the in-car action of them. And we kind of discover what drifting is. It's this car control, driving sport. And we started to go to empty lots and bring a couple cones out, and we're just make a little 90-degree turn, and we're just trying to make the car go sideways through the turn.
Wow.
And that was 1999.
So that it's raw basics.
Yeah.
That's how it starts.
Oh,
Yep.
yeah. Yeah, no idea. There's no translation. There's not like, oh, step one, do this. It's like we see that they drive to the turn, and then they turn in and hit the gas. And we had to it was all trial and error.
So no handbrakes, no.
Not at the beginning, yeah. It was,
It's an interesting journey, isn't it?
Yeah, it was. I don't think I definitely had pulled the handbrake. I didn't know what I was doing or how to, kind of work with it. It was mostly just power over sliding back then.
Yep.
Probably didn't pull the handbrake purposely until like 2003. I think it was like as we went to Road Atlanta Formula Drift Round 1 in 2004, it was many drivers' first time ever needing to use the handbrake.
At that point.
Yeah, because we're driving into, this 90-degree corner.
Yep.
And, we're maybe coming up to it about like 50, 60 miles an hour, but it's a 30, 40 mile an hour corner, and so you have to slow the car down.
Yeah.
And a lot of us kind of had to figure that out at that event.
Because there's so much about washing off speed as well as technique, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And so now it's a quick staple. Most people put a hydraulic handbrake in their cars, one of the first steps. It's not that that's necessary, but it's interesting where you kind of get thrown into a position where, half the drivers there couldn't use a handbrake. And so you just have people just kind of like pacing up to the turn down the straightaway and waiting to kick the clutch out of the corner. But,
Bang.
it was literally over 20 years ago.
It's crazy. Were you always a hands-on person? Obviously, you're talking about the modifications to the cars and that. Was that from the start? Did that come from somewhere in your family, or how'd that work?
No. Family and racing, other than my grandfather did some drag. He worked on a drag racing team, and my uncles were kind of enthralled by it.
Yep.
But nobody was really mechanically savvy. They were just kind of like, I wouldn't say gearheads. They were just enthusiasts of drag.
Yeah.
So they took me to the drag strip once or twice, and got to see like Top Fuel cars run down. And I was 10 or 11 years old, so just loud, crazy cars. Don't really know what I'm looking at, and that kind of just like went away. And then 3 or 4 years later, as like the group of my friends are all about a year or so older than me, they all started to get their license. And what do you do when you're 16 in 1997 or 8? It's you go buy an old Honda, And so then we start to learn how to modify them, and we're buying intakes and things like that, and like making some custom parts in our garage. So I was basically like self-taught fabricator, self-taught mechanic, and once again, like we're just whatever we can find online on how to make these cars, go faster and look cooler is what we're doing.
And was this in Pennsylvania?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Pennsylvania. So my parents had like this old farmhouse, and there was a barn on the property, and so there was one big like kind of stall open area. So we kind of turned that into a little garage port. And so my friends would bring their cars over, and we would be working on them in that garage and building them out. We did like our first SR20 swap there in like 2001, things like that. Yeah.
That's what a. To get to where we are today, what an incredible journey. It's one major thing. Was building the cars as fun as it was to?
Oh yeah. Yeah,
really.
Still is. Yeah. I enjoy the build as much as the drive, because it's the drive is like the reward of the build, right? And so it's the build is what brings the creativity out, right? And that is like part of what drifting is the build, like, getting the look, having the car be unique, different from others. You see a lot of people kind of picking random chassis to maybe get the look, but in the end, you're still modifying it to be your own.
Correct.
So no matter what the chassis is, like you still have to build it into something, which is why I've always enjoyed kind of being a little, I wouldn't say that I'm like tremendously unorthodox, but we don't just grab the chassis, put the LS engine into it, and the same kind of cookie cutter build you might see. Like what's cool about Australia, I noticed, is that you have a lot of like purists and a lot of unique builds, right? Whereas in the States, it kind of gets repetitious because everybody's trying to build that competition car.
Yes.
So it's like, I need my E46 with the LS motor, with the supercharger, and the WiseFab kit. It's just like, that's the drift car.
Yep.
And, for me, I've always had a Nissan engine in my Nissan chassis. I've been one of, either one of one, Z chassis in competition, or maybe one of three. Like, it's not the most commonly used chassis in Formula Drift. And, if people are driving a Nissan, it's usually an S chassis. And then they're, once again, either putting a 2J into it or an LS engine into it. There are, very, very few Nissan-powered vehicles in competition drifting in North America.
Tell us about your Nissan engine journey, because over the years it obviously changes quite a bit. Where did it start? Where is it now? What's been some of those engines and how have they changed, and how's it made life easier and more difficult, I guess, some of the years too?
A little bit, yeah. So in 2003, I drove across the country. So it was basically 3,000 miles. So that's what? 5,500K, right? And so it's definitely a distance. Drove out for the first D1 driver search. And I had my Mazda RX-7, and I get there and didn't make it past first round. And it was just like kind of like an eye-opener for me, because I get there and it's like all the cars are nice and they're clean, they're lower, and they got cool wheels, and people got their vinyl kits on them and the easy ups. And I'm just like, all right, something's happening out here, right? And so basically drove back to Pennsylvania, sold my RX-7, and put that as a down payment towards Nissan Z. So the 350Z had just come out that summer, right? So the 350, the Z is back as a 350. It's been gone for several years, and there's a lot of hype around that car. And so I was like, okay, like this just seems like, I don't know what it was, but it just seemed like the right move for me. And so I wanted to get something that was, once again, like the unorthodox build, right? Something that's nobody else is driving. So I kind of put my money where my mouth was, and invested into the chassis. I was making payments on that thing for like 3 years.
Wow.
But immediately modified it, got some coilovers and some wheels, and I got it looking pretty flashy. So when I moved back to California in the fall, so only a few months later, I moved back to California and instantly was getting attention, right? Because it was the new car. I was out drifting amongst a sea of, 240s. And so that was how I was able to get support right out of the get-go, because all of these companies were trying to develop parts for the new chassis, right? Because there was a lot of hype behind it. So I was getting, coilovers, I was getting, wheel support, I was getting, all these different pieces, the body kits and all that companies were trying to create, and using my chassis to market it. And so was able to get some support with that, but I immediately blew up the engine because it had a supercharger on it, and there wasn't too much support. So I blew up the engine, and I was working with the Signal Auto team, right? So the Drift Twins way back then, and they had an extra SR20 sitting there. And so I was like, I'm gonna put that engine into this car. And they thought I was kind of crazy, but I had already put an SR into my FC. So I was like, this is gonna be a lot easier.
You knew the
actually.
process.
So we put the SR into my first Z, and I competed the first year of Formula Drift in that. And from there, year 2, I built a S15 with an SR, and so that was a great chassis. I got my first FD win in that car. I got my first podiums in the Z. Year 1, round 1 and round 2, we went second place and third place at the first 2 FD events.
Man, that's pretty special.
Yeah, it was awesome. And so, then S15 year 2, and then it was actually Nissan that approached me because I knew some of the guys in motorsports, because yet again, I was one of the very, very few people racing in a new Z, right? That wasn't one of their own. So I was getting some support from them because they were local in SoCal. And they basically told me like, hey, we would love to see you back in a Z chassis in Formula Drift. So I was like, great. And so they provided me with a convertible. So the one that I drove for almost 10 years. Actually, it was like 10 years.
Damn.
And yet again, we're starting to notice power's starting to go up. You had Hubinet out there with the V10. Reese Milne out there with like a 600 horsepower LS. And, we're kind of like topped out at like, 400 horsepower with the SRs at that time. And so we're like, we should put a V8 in the car. And so we looked at the VK56 and the 4.5 liter as well. And we went with the 56. It was a bigger motor, and we knew we could make it fit. And that was the first V8 swapped chassis in Formula Drift, actually.
Wow, so that was sort of the pioneer of where we're at now.
Yeah. So it wasn't the first V8, like I was saying, but it was the first chassis with a V8 that didn't come with one in Formula Drift. And so we did that, and I ran with that setup for, basically until 2017 was the VKZ. It was had many different iterations, from like 350 horsepower all the way up to 1200 in the end when we're getting away from the V8, because we eventually were able to get an engine program that was making almost 900 horsepower NA, and then we would put like a 300 horsepower shot of nitrous on top, and it was just like chewing up motors. We're running out of inventory, and it was a really expensive program. And so I went. So this was, after Daigo comes over and he's showing 1,200 horsepower turbo setups, and so the turbo era kind of started to take over in like 2012 and on.
Yep.
So there's already been like 5 years of people winning championships and other events in like the 2Js with the big turbos. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do a VQ with a twin turbo package. Didn't quite work out. So the VQ engine, it's a great motor up until about 800 horsepower. And if you want to make more than that, especially in drifting, which with how harsh drifting is, it will really just rattle the block apart. And so like all the RPM, all the torque, especially with nitrous or anti-lag or anything like that. So we're cracking blocks and we're lifting heads and things like that. So we tried that for 2 years, couldn't get it to hold. We have demo cars that make like 600-700 horsepower and they run for years. But like there's just that threshold where like they don't like it. Right?
Yeah, the bell curve just hits and off it goes.
Yeah. So we swapped to the VR38, the GTR engine, and that thing just runs like a top.
So just bulletproof.
Yeah, you can make 2,000 horsepower on those stock blocks. It's crazy.
It's insane.
Not stock internals, but the factory casting, I mean. Yeah. So it's like almost triple of what a VQ can handle.
With the horsepower figures when you first went to the V8 and the chassis, how'd the chassis handle it?
The chassis was fine. We had it, we were pretty adamant about stitch welding our chassis and obviously, doing the roll cages. And instead of having it like braced up the A-pillars and everything else like we do now, we had like all the gusset plating and everything else. So the chassis was very stiff. It handled the V8 no problem. It was more so the drivetrain. So we started to just blow through drivetrain because this is like before the days of every car gets a dog box, every car gets drive shaft shop axles. Like yet again, I was the first customer to drive shaft shop. So the company now basically supplies everybody with their axles. It was they were just focused on front wheel drive stuff and obviously other applications. But we reached out to them and said, hey, can you make like a custom axle for us? We keep breaking them. And so we were the first drift customer of theirs to go to them and ask for this upgrade. And we went through like 8 iterations until we eventually ended up where the pro level axles are now that are basically bulletproof.
It's insane, isn't it?
Yeah,
to come from there where it was, like pieces falling apart just about, to now where you sort of don't see it. You don't see the issue too much now. Yeah,
it's very rare now that you see drivetrain failure. It does happen, like clutches will slip eventually because it is a wear item. I mean, the drivetrain will break if you don't keep up on it.
Yes.
So, eventually the dog gears will start to wear and they'll pop out of gear or you'll break a gear. But if you keep up on the maintenance, they stay together just like the rear ends. If you keep up on them and check the backlash, you'll be good. But if you just run, it'll slowly loosen up and you get less teeth engagement and it'll shred. And so same thing with the axles. If you don't go through and check the wear, the cages will get little fine line cracks. But everything is very much prolonged than what it used to be where one clutch kick will send a pair of axles through the roof.
So I guess in that time from sort of 2003 and that, reliability is one of the things that's increased.
Yeah.
Considering
100%.
the power. Like
it's, the power is 4 times what it ever was back then. And, the reliability is even better. So like last year we went all season on one engine. So it's, making, I'd say like 1,100 horsepower to the ground almost. So it's like 1,300 at the engine at least. And the only issue that we had with the car last year mechanically was it was a shifter, or a shift rod, I should say. So basically, we were having, once again, the dog rings were starting to slip a little bit. It was trying to pop out of gear. And I pulled on the shifter so hard, I actually bent the shift rod, which is like, it's made of tool steel. So it's pretty strong stuff. But we, like you said, rarely have mechanical failures nowadays. But it does happen, obviously.
Which event was this at and where were you?
Road Atlanta. Yeah, so it's one of the only, actually, like, of course you can shift on tracks if you choose to, but most of the tracks you'll notice that the driver will get up into the high gear and just stays there. Because
what gear? Third gear?
Fourth gear typically.
Gear?
So the dog box is geared, it's got 4 speeds, and so we typically gear the rear end so that fourth is the 1-to-1, and that's the gear that we land in. And so Road Atlanta with the little keyhole is one of the very, very few tracks that it is a benefit to downshift and then re-upshift. But once again, like because of all of the power that you're generating,
Yep.
you're like quadrupling the wear on the car because you're putting in one shift.
Yeah.
If you just put it in fourth and left it there, it'll go all day. But because you have to knock it down and back up again, and you're doing it so abruptly,
Yeah.
every time you shift it, it's another chunk, another chunk, another chunk.
True.
And so, like we're already talking about it, we're just gonna gear our car so we just run one gear all the way through. You'll notice some of the drivers will do that.
Yep.
Yeah.
As a reliability. Yeah, basically as a reliability thing.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just one less failure point. You know, like anytime you go for an upshift, you got, an 80% chance it's gonna go in.
Damn, it's
Yeah.
insane. What's been some of the, over the period of time, what's been some of the real key events that you look at and go, sort of pinch yourself events? What's been some of those that we can talk of, Chris?
Just overall, like,
Yeah.
I mean, of course, it's easy to go back to like the big accolade events, like winning a championship or first
Yeah.
wins and things like that. But I'd say like one of the coolest ones that I got to do, I got to go to Japan for an event at Ebisu back in like 2004, 2005. I got taken over there and met up with Daijiro. But it was, I think, more so 2009 when I went to a Matsuri event at Ebisu, and it was the first time I met Daigo. And this is before he was the Daigo that we all know and love today.
Yeah.
He was just like kind of like a crazy dude with a chaser. This is before the red chaser and all that. And so got to go over there, and I was jumping down the hill in his little Mark III. And it was just crazy, right? I'm like,
Yeah.
this is like kind of mental, because we didn't have missile cars in North America yet. And so that was like this pivotal moment of like, okay, these guys get it. Like they have their pro car, and then they have these thrash beater cars.
Yep.
And so I went back to the States and immediately built my little 240SX.
Yep.
And so that it started off white, turned black, and it's been black for several years. But that 240 that I have, I've had since '09, and I bought that specifically because I came off of that Ebisu event. Like, I need a bash car, I need a missile car, and that's like kind of what. It was one of the first ones I would say in the States that was, like the purpose-built
Yep.
missile car, right? Because of course people have beat-up cars. I'm not saying I had the first car with a dent in the door,
of course.
but to be a pro driver and build a beater and take it out to run doors with other drivers, that was one of the first ones ever in the States. And so just kind of like seeing and acknowledging what they were doing as far as training in Japan, like kind of blew my mind. And that was a really cool pivotal event for me.
How hard was it to find that car?
It was actually a chassis that we bought, myself and the rest of the DA boys. So Vaughn, Turk, and Tony, we bought it to enter into what's called a 24 Hours of Lemons race.
Yes, yep.
Yeah, okay. So we bought the
Yep.
240 to race in that.
Yep.
And we bought it, caged it, had a little race seat, and then it was just sitting.
Yeah.
And so I basically called the guys up and I was like, hey, like I want to pay you guys off for that because we all put it on the pot
Yep.
to do that event. So I was like, hey, I want to pay you guys to own the 240.
Yep.
Like I want to make this my little drift car. Like, yeah, okay. And so there it went.
That's pretty cool. Like,
Yeah.
to have it as a group of friends circuit car.
Yeah.
To that point.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me, like, we won't keep you long because obviously it's Friday afternoon. There's
No
heaps of other
worries.
stuff to do. What's the to have a car sort of named after you? Obviously,
That's, yeah.
Is that weird?
Yeah, I mean, so
Like when
I
you
know,
see
I know
one on
we're
the
talking
street.
about like events, but yeah, if you
Yeah.
want to talk about like
Just
an
as a broad
outside of like
spectrum.
a car event, but just
Yeah.
like a moment, if
Yeah.
you will, like that was probably one of the coolest things. It still like doesn't even settle in. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Because I've never in my life have I thought that I'd have a car, especially with a brand like Nissan that had my name on the back. And yes, it is like a limited edition vehicle. Of course, we're not going to roll a car through the factory with my name on it.
Yes, yeah, of course.
It's
Yeah.
not going to be the Nissan Forsberg, but it's the Nissan Frontier Forsberg
Forsberg
edition.
edition, yeah.
is a really cool truck package that we helped Nismo Off-Road develop those parts, and we put them onto our Frontier, took it down to Mexico, ran it in
Yep.
a 500-mile Baja race, won the class. We drove the truck there, raced 500 miles, drove the truck back, and there was not a single issue with it. And that was basically how we birthed that package, right?
Yeah.
So it was we have like the roof rack, the rock rails, the front suspension, rear suspension, exhaust, obviously like a little vinyl package, and a few other little bits. But it was basically like the proving ground of this was like on the wheels and tires, of course. It was basically a proving ground of this package can handle it,
Yeah.
And so it kind of like helped develop, that entire, look and feel of, everybody gets a couple little aftermarket parts for their vehicle, but to like have it be a package and to go out and win in a race and have that accolade was awesome in itself. And then for it to just roll into that package and seeing the name on it at a dealership was pretty crazy.
Yeah, I thought it would be. It'd be, when you see one on the street, yeah, it'd be a weird feeling.
Yeah, it is.
In a strange way, but it's very cool.
Yeah, no, it's very cool. Like we have one, we drive it every day. Love
You do?
it. Oh yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, so Nissan was cool. They saved me badge number 64.
Yeah, awesome.
So yeah, even though it was technically like negative -001, I guess, because it was like the prototype truck.
Pre-production truck.
Yeah. And but yeah, it's really cool.
That's neat. Tell me, so many people here that will listen to this, like, want to get into drifting, love to do it as a profession, may never get to, but marketing is a huge part of it. Sponsorship-wise, you retain your sponsors for such a long period of time. That's a real big thing for anyone that's in marketing. To see someone or motorsport in general, keep a sponsor is really difficult. How do you do it?
It's all about forming a relationship, because a lot of people look at sponsors as it's a sponsor. I like to call them as partners, right?
Yep.
So we relate to all of our partners in different ways. We talk to them as much as possible, right?
Yep.
And trying to figure out what their goals are, like whether it's yearly or quarterly, and how we can help them achieve that. If they want to get some light on a certain build or a certain product, we kind of like roll that into our planning and our program for the year. I've been with Nissan since 2003. I've been with NOS since 2006. I was with K&N since 2007. And so, yeah, a lot of these brands, we've been with for almost 20 years.
Yeah.
And to me, that's really important, because it's easy to like, jump around and, maybe make a couple more bucks a year if you go for the, the bigger prize, but you're going to just burn out your relationships in that capacity. So, we don't change partnerships unless, something drastic happens.
It's a good thing.
Yeah.
It's a really good thing. It's a bit like, as a spectator's point of view, someone in marketing, it's huge to see someone that retains their sponsors for so long.
Yeah, no,
it's
thank you.
Formula D, has it changed?
Of course.
How? My apologies. How has it changed? And we talk about wins, championships. Like I won't break it down, but it's very impressive. How's it changed? How's your journey been with it? And obviously here we get a little bit of culture from obviously watching it. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I was saying, there's been huge shifts in especially competition drifting, which I would say happen about every 5 years. There's another shift as to what is like the focus. In the first 5 years, it's just about consistency, right? Being able to get around the track smoothly, hit your marks, hit your line, and do it every time, right? And that's how we got a lot of success in the early days, just being very smooth and consistent through the course. Then the next phase kind of rolled into the speed era. So when cars started like kind of pick up speed, started running big tires, light chassis, and this was like right when they started putting big power into the cars, like going from like the 400 to 500 horsepower to like the 600, 700, 800 horsepower, and that was when it was about basically creating the gap.
Yep.
So who could handle the most grip in the car, right? I mean, obviously it's still the case to today, but that was the first time it really took over. And so we were able to, that was right when we started running we started really dialing in the V8, and we started to have, good traction, good power, and we could keep up with basically anyone on the track.
Yep.
But this was like where like the kind of great divide started to begin, not just based off talent, but based off the mechanicals of the car, right? So the first 5 years are like kind of talent. You just see people kind of spread out. Maybe they're scared, or they just, nobody was really running door to door back then.
Yep.
And then, then it just became like a mechanical race. And so we were pretty able to keep up with that and have good success there. And then the next era was all about the proximity, right? And so that was the Daigo effect, right? So he comes in, 1,200 horsepower, and it's like, it didn't matter how much angle you had. If your car was present, you were going to get the win, right? And so it wasn't about being smooth. The line wasn't as important. People are chopping cones and dipping tires, but if you were pressing up on that car, it looked cool, right? It was like the first time we really had that, like, just every run is close, no matter what. And then that kind of faded off, and then it became, the trifecta of everybody's fast, you have to be close, but you have to be smooth and have angle, right? And so that was when kind of like the James Dean era, as we call it. So, Daigo was 2012, and then 5 years later, James Dean comes over in 17.
Yep.
And, so then it was like the big angle era, and not just like big angle and slow, but big angle and smooth and fast. And so we developed angle kit into our car to help with, having the angle, having more speed, and that's what carried us into our championships in 14 and 16. So yeah, we went, what was it? Second, first, third, first, 4 years in a row in the championship. And so that was like some of our most successful years, of course. That was like the peak of the V8 car, peak of like having like great suspension, great speed, like the whole like trifecta, like I was saying. And then that's when we started dabbling into the twin turbo V6 setups. And it took us a little bit to kind of rebound off of that until we started getting back on the podium again. But and now it is, it's starting to become like the reliability, right? So you have everybody turning up the power, everybody getting more grip, the tires are getting stickier and stickier. So you're putting more load on the car. And so the past couple years has been, having the speed, the grip, and the power and the reliability to be able to do it every run. Yeah. But also it's the judging obviously has changed over the years, what the focus is. And, so the focus recently has been, I don't know, in my mind it's been like, it's been a little, a little inconsistent as far as like it's not that, good runs aren't being rewarded, but there's different aspects to a good run, right? Whether it's like he's on the line and like painting a perfect lead lane, or he's able to keep up and put it on the door. And so it's not always consistent to know what the favor is, right? And so there's always like, which way the scales tip, right? Yeah. Where it's like, oh, it's like lead versus lead, or it's chase versus chase. Yep. And so the way that people set up their cars will favor one or the other, and we can't touch the cars in between the run, right? So if you set your car up to be, nice and smooth and consistent, and put it on the wall, and like, have a perfect lead run, and then the other driver's all hooked up and he's stuck on the inside. There was a time where like that lead driver would win, almost no matter what. And now it's kind of going back to almost that proximity is key, right? So it feels like it's turning back into as long as the car is present, you get the win. Just kind of push them and grind them through the course. It's like, in my opinion, like a little sloppy, where I'd like to see a little grip taken back out of the cars. Not so much focus on the speed again and trying to just create the gap and have a bunch of twitchy cars out there, but just having that nice, smooth, buttery drift. Yeah,
because like watching it, looks magic. Like that's what looks magic, doesn't it? Nice, clean, buttery. That's what looks really cool.
Yeah, and there are some tracks that really like showcase that. Yeah. Orlando, I'd say, be the biggest one because it's two constant radius corners. Yeah. Right. There's no real ifs, ands, or buts. There's one transition through the middle. Yep. And you can tell real quick, who's missing that mark. Yep. And when I talk about trying to understand the consistency, because you'll see everybody goes up, they put it on the wall, right? But then the chase guy, is the chase guy down here like this, or is he right up on him, matched up? And then when you come through that transition, you got some guys blowing through cones, jumping and they're falling all over the place, but they get back on the door, and kind of sloppily, in my opinion, if that's a word. It's a real word, right? Can we get a check on that?
I think it is.
So
it'll do for now.
And then and it goes back into he's right there, and it's okay, well, what did he do to get there, right? And you kind of lose that control for a moment. Yeah. So I guess that's what I'm getting at. I kind of need to go back and watch some of the competition runs from last year going into this year to kind of see which drivers did well at which tracks based on how the driving was, to have a better understanding going into this year on what the focus is, at least in the closest way possible, which is the previous event.
How's your passion?
It's, I'd say, I absolutely still love drifting. Yeah. Top to bottom, head to toe, especially events like this. It's just fun. It's great to see new tracks, new cars, new people, new fans. Even driving with other drivers. Formo drift is definitely it's the job, right? It's tough. Stress levels are high. You want to succeed, you want to perform, and if something goes wrong with the car, it's all hands on deck. You got to get it done. Versus if you're at like a Grid Life or like a Matsuri, like this event, it's like, oh, we'll miss the next session. We'll make sure we're good and we'll go back on track. Yep. And like, that's what kind of keeps the passion there, right? Because there's not the looming stress of, if this doesn't get fixed, we're done and, weekend's over and everything.
Absolutely.
So it's events like this that keep the passion.
Because I was going to ask that because Baja, obviously different events outside of drifting.
Yeah.
Is there any other desirables that you look like? Is there a Pikes Peak in you? Is there anything that you look at that go, wow, I'd like to really have a go at that?
Yeah, it's I did a couple road races last year in those rush cars. So they were really fun and exciting. They're center seat, open cockpit, rear engine. Basically little one-to-one cars, really quick.
Yep.
And I was able to, on my second race ever, I qualified third 2 days in a row. And so,
wow. What circuit?
It was Laguna Seca.
Cool.
So yeah, like legendary circuit.
Yep.
Running at the front of the pack. It was really, really cool. So basically started to like, scratch the itch of like, maybe I'd be good at road racing. And so that kind of like gave me that like check mark of like, you might be. So now I'm like kind of looking into doing more of that because yet again, other forms of motorsport stoke the passion, right? So
Absolutely.
Baja kind of does that for me. The road racing does that for me because it's just a different discipline, right?
Yep.
As much as drifting is amazing and I'll never stop doing it, it is still, it's the same thing. What changes it is going to new tracks and new places like this, versus just doing the same 8 rounds every year. So that's why we go to the Grid Life events and we travel the world, and that's what makes drifting exciting instead of just focusing on strictly the competition.
Yep.
But yeah, even still, competition can be exciting, like when it gets out of your norm, like I was saying, like Baja race, the rush races, or I'd love to get into GT4 or GT3, and so yeah, we're looking into that a little bit to see if we can hop into another car, another seat.
What do you expect for this weekend?
Sunshine.
I like the attitude.
Yeah. I think we're all looking for that.
Yeah, definitely.
But no, it's I heard the weather's gonna break. It's a little wet today, but that's all good. Save our tires for the weekend. But just stoked to be here. I heard there's gonna be thousands of people here. There's over 300 drivers, and that's probably the biggest drift event I've ever been to.
Wow.
I'm trying to think. Obviously, like 1 or 2 of those Matsuris that I've been to would be over in Japan. I don't know what their count is as far as cars, but they certainly don't have that spectators, right? It's more of just like a driver's circuit. But this is a massive amount of drift cars in one facility. So I'm just stoked to go out and run with some of the locals and have a great time.
Awesome, mate. Well, thank you for coming.
Yeah.
There's actually a family down in the back corner there. They come from Germany to watch this weekend.
Really?
Yeah, so they're camping here for the weekend.
They got us beat.
So yeah, they've come all the way from Germany, and we're like, was there anything? No, we're coming for this. So I was like, that's pretty damn cool. So
that's really cool.
Chris Forsberg, thank you so much, mate. I really appreciate it, and have a nice weekend.
Yeah, you too. We'll see you out there.
Thanks, mate. That's all we have time for on today's show. If you get the chance, head over to YouTube and hit subscribe on the Talk and Chatter page. Also, head over to iTunes and give us a star rating and a review there. It all helps to get the podcast out there. A big thank you goes to everyone that's been doing this already, and we'll be back with another show soon.